Hello, everyone. It's my great pleasure today to interview for our podcast, The Meaning of Life, where philosophy gets personal, Dr. Loren Cannon. Loren Cannon holds a PhD in philosophy with an emphasis on applied ethics, philosophy of law, and LGBTQ philosophy. He's a faculty member at Cal Poly Humboldt since 2006, where he teaches a variety of classes, especially applied ethics, environmental ethics, philosophy of law, and trans lives and theory. Dr. Cannon's recent book length project entitled The Politicization of Trans Identity, an analysis of backlash, scapegoating, and dog whistling from Obergefell to Bostock, has just been published by Lexington Press of Rowman and Littlefield Publishers. The publication of this work coincides with yet another way of explicitly anti-transgender legislation across the county, and is a timely philosophical intervention and critique of these political efforts. So I strongly suggest you to go and read this book, and thank you, Loren, for joining us today.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. I'm really looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, today we are going to talk a little about happiness and how it connects to the meaning of life. So, if you like, I would start with this question for you. Can happiness be a choice? What do you think?
Mm. As you know, I've been thinking about this a lot, and it's such a question, and it's a question that I think so many thinkers, whether they call themselves philosophers or not, have thought about that. My first thought was that if somebody says yes, it's a choice, then I wonder like, well, what kind of happiness are we talking about? That is it kind of a superficial happiness, maybe not so one that's so robust. Of course, it goes back to the characterization of happiness itself. But I guess for me, I think of a lot of how we're also interdependent. We're interdependent with each other, with our communities, with our families, with our chosen families, with the environment and our non-human relatives. And so, there's some idea to think like if it's just a choice and I can be happy, even though horrible stuff might be happening out otherwise, I guess I don't like that as well. But I do think there's a lot of, in philosophy and other traditions too, that kind of argue or, kind of have a practice for having a quiet core in oneself, like a quiet core, and to say that like this doesn't mean we're robots. We don't feel about when things happen to ourselves or others, because sometimes like life really sucks. Sometimes things are really bad, and I think we have to really, understand that. But then to have a quiet core within ourselves to say like, all right, things are not ideal, or maybe far less than ideal. And then to say, well, what am I going to do? Like, can I make choices that are consistent with my values and my principles? Can I make choices about how to respond to this that are in keeping with my own integrity? And I think that leads to, I don't know if it's happiness. I think I'd want to say contentedness, to say like, all right, my core is stable. I'm all right. Things are bad, maybe. but there's a sense of oneself that one can like ride through the storm, and I think that I guess that appeals to me, because we can't control everything that happens to us. Some things are really bad, and we can't control everything that's happening to our friends and our community members elsewhere. So I would say to the question, maybe choosing to an extent, but I would want to say kind of a quietness or a contentedness.
Because I read that your dissertation focused on the sense of responsibility. How do you think the sense of responsibility might play into happiness? I mean, as little as I know about your life, I know that things didn't come easy to you. That there was a line of responsible choices, struggles, decisions that had to be made in order to reach at least a sense of contentment. Do you think that responsibility takes something away from this choice we make toward contentment and happiness? Or because when I talk about responsibility with my students, they say, "Oh my God, that's too heavy."
Nobody likes to talk about responsibility.
I don't know. It doesn't seem so heavy to me. But it's why I'm asking you, because you examine the concept, so I'm curious to see your point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, on the one hand, going back to like integrity and, one's core principles, I don't think I'd be happy if I felt I was being irresponsible. So my happiness would go down the tank, if I thought I was being irresponsible about something. But I think, it was the idea of responsibility that led me to philosophy in the first place, and that I was living outside the United States. I was living in Nepal in a very small village, and we didn't have running water or electricity or money. I started thinking about natural resource use, actually. I started thinking about how, like, the average middle-class American, can take 40 times the amount of resources or more than 40 times the amount of resources than a friend of mine in my village at the time. And I thought, wait, like, how is one responsible with regards to like the natural resources we consume and our impact on the earth? And then even more so than on an individual level, what do we say to that about like a collective level? Like looking at the natural resource use of the United States as opposed to like someplace like Nepal or Honduras or something like that. And I thought, this is before I studied philosophy, formally. And I didn't know anybody asked these questions. I wanted to know, like, how are we supposed to do this? What are we responsible for? I mean, do we say, like, now we might say, like, is the industrialized countries responsible for global climate change?
Right.
People say, kind of seems like it. But then, like, how do we, justify that and dig a little deeper, and be careful about that? So that's what like got me into philosophy in the first place. And it was more environmental than anything else. And I came out of that situation. I wrote in my journal pages and pages and pages and pages and pages. Much later, I got to study philosophy, and I was like, oh, like I can ask these questions and other people do too. And we can have a conversation about it. And I was elated to find that out.
Where did you turn to answer these questions?
I was teaching community college math at the time because I have a background in math too. I could have a free course. So I took a free course in Philosophy 101. We're just talking about responsibility and duty and those kinds of things. And again, like, I'm a first generation college student. I didn't take philosophy as an undergrad. I didn't know what that was. And again, like I say, I was elated. So then I took night classes for about 6 years, as I was teaching college level math during the day, and I was taking philosophy classes at night, and other things about how to live a good life and what does it mean to have integrity and how do we do what's happiness. And so then for 6 years I took night classes and then went to PhD school.
I see. And was there a philosopher that spoke to you more than others in these moments, or it was a connection of that mix of?
Well, there's two philosophers, and they're really not very well known. But at the time, about the time, Larry May was doing a lot on collective responsibility, and Peter French. And I was a student of Peter French. He was a great mentor to me at Arizona State University. And I didn't realize it, but he and Larry May kind of like sparred with each other at like the conferences. They have been very influential. So how do we say that we have shared responsibility for something? And of course, like Pete Singer, I think, has been influential on so many too.
Is there a pill or a main concept that you got and treasured from them that you can share with us?
You know, I think that one thing is that, so in my dissertation was on collective responsibility, and that seemed to become a big topic right after World War II. And all of the, the philosophers in the English speaking world were saying like, oh my gosh, is Germany responsible for the Holocaust? Say like, well, that's kind of a complicated question. Do you mean every single German? Does it come in degrees, or does like, I'm thinking of Carl Jaspers too, like, or does responsibility reside on the collective level? Does it distribute to individuals like a negative sign outside of parentheses? Yeah. Of Annette Baer too, like of all the different philosophers I read at that time, Larry May, including and Peter Francis, to say that, at that time, there's people in philosophy who would say like collective responsibility. The idea that a collective is responsible is just nonsense. That makes no sense. Only individuals are responsible. Collectives are not. And I was glad to find out that there were good people like May and French and Baer and Jaspers and so many others who said like, no, we can have an understanding of responsibility of a collective, and maybe we have to, because we are so much influenced by the collectives that we reside within.
Which beautifully connects with what you were saying at the beginning. I mean, I might be happy in choosing to be consistent with my core values, with what is important in my life. But of course, if the world is going through craziness, can I feel happy? Well, there's a part of shared responsibility I have to look at.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
Right now, shared responsibility for global climate change, shared responsibility for our collective political climate. Like if we can kind of nurture a quiet core that's not impervious to what's going on in the world. And I don't think it can be, and I don't think it should be, but it's to say that, we have a sense of strength and resolve and maybe consistency too, to rely on. But that doesn't mean we're going to close our identity off from others and then just have this little like project to make myself happy and, who knows what's happening elsewhere.
Absolutely. Can I ask you what pushed you to go that far in Nepal? I mean, I suppose that you are in the US now, or you were in the US.
Yeah, I'm up here in Humboldt County now. Yeah.
Why Nepal?
Well, it was a strange thing. So I graduated in high school in '82. And then I graduated college in '86, studying math, secondary education, and a Spanish minor. And I had my first job was teaching math and Spanish at a high school. Strong sense that there was a whole world out there that I didn't know about. Where we could so easily like get in what's maybe a little echo chamber or like a very small society, and a lot of people have our same values and cultures and language, and I felt like how could I, maybe this sounds stronger than I mean it to, but like I think one should put themselves in places to challenge that, to challenge that, like, wow, other people see things completely different than I do. And I have no idea what that looks like, no idea. And I think there's some things with regards to culture and language that you really only understand if you're immersed in it. So I joined the Peace Corps. So I was a Peace Corps volunteer, and in Nepal they needed math teachers. And basically the whole thing was like, oh, that's weird. I'm a math teacher. So I lived there for about 3 years. It was very difficult coming back to the US in many ways, but but I learned a lot, and I hope that the schools I taught at, they needed teachers, and again, I was like, well, I can do that. So I taught algebra in Nepali language for about 3 years.
So you spoke in language?
Yeah.
Oh, where did you learn? How did
In Nepal, yeah.
Oh, wow.
In Nepal. And it was confusing though, because I just got done teaching math in Spanish, and then I was teaching math in Nepali. So I would get confused, and there's weird words that are the same in Nepali and are same in Spanish. How could that be? I have no idea, but I would get confused sometimes. But my students were patient, and I got better as time went. So.
Was that an experience in which you had to question everything about yourself? Or did you have other experiences that were even stronger than that one?
Yeah.
And you find that you have to start from scratch?
Yeah. Well, maybe, related to having some sort of like quiet center. I think it'd be terrifying to question everything about oneself all at once. We did seeing the United States, particular consumerism and our relationship to the environment from someplace else there's a lot of questioning. And being immersed in a culture that wasn't my own and no one to speak English with, right? That is like, well, like, what are you, Loren? I was a collegiate swimmer, and that was a huge part of my life in college. Huge, like 3, 4, 5 hours of practice a day, like swimming. And then I went to where I lived in Nepal. I told them I swam, and they only knew like this little creek at the end of the bottom of the hill. What am I if I'm not a swimmer anymore? How does that work? And so that was certainly things to think about. Also, related to my book, The Politicization of Trans Identity. But I'm a trans person, and so at that time when I was living in Nepal, it was I was before transition. So my students had never seen a woman teacher before, and it was interesting because they called me sir, but they called me sir because they didn't think the word sir was gendered. They thought sir just meant teacher. But that is weird. It's weird because it's like there was reasons that sir kind of felt comfortable. I started thinking about my own gender identity later in life, right after studying philosophy and giving a moment to think, like having time and space to think, and not being like closed up, scared of what opening one's mind might bring. But I did decide to transition. So I was assigned female at birth and went through life as a girl, woman person till I was 40. I'm 58. I'm 58 now. But that involved a lot of questioning. That involved a lot of questioning in terms of, how do I understand myself? How do I understand myself in context? What choices can I make to, have a future that I can imagine? And I think for me, and trans stories are all different, and and there's no one way, of course. But for me, like, I could not see a future. I could see no future without transition. And it was at a point that I could finally think about making that kind of decision. And so it was difficult.
So basically you found yourself in Nepal, teaching mathematics in Nepalese, not being, being an American, but in a foreign land. Not being, I'm sorry about my voice, COVID stroke. So being a swimmer, but certainly not being able to swim, being called sir while being a woman, and yet already started thinking about transitioning. And what what struck me is that before you spoke about this quiet place is a strong core that you keep calm and allows you to question one thing at a time. Because I mean,
Yes.
right, in that moment you had plenty of things on the plate that might have made you feel, lonely, lost,
Oh, yeah.
disorganized at least. I don't know. I mean, it's quite a change of setting. Do you
Yeah.
want to share with us about this quiet place? Maybe,
Mm,
some of us struggles to get there, and it could be.
yeah.
Do you
Yeah, I can't claim that I have mastered anything like that. I think it's more of a goal. But you're right. I mean, when I was, away from everything I understood, um, a lot of things get stripped away. And it was after that, when I came home from being gone, I came out as a lesbian then. I couldn't come out I
Ah,
couldn't come out as a lesbian earlier because I I thought that I was going to go to hell, and that so in that like time of lots of loneliness, but loneliness and reading books, I came to the idea to say, like, you know what, it's okay to be attracted to women. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And you can tell people that. And so that took a long time. I was raised in a pretty traditional Irish Catholic family. And then, so I came out as a lesbian. I thought that was the last time I'd have to come out, but it wasn't, because as time went on, and I had women partners and, you know, girlfriends, whatever, that I realized that um, there was something else, that um, really needed to be thought about and attended to. And we mentioned you were charitable a moment ago, saying I look younger than my age. Well, I always have. So when I lived overseas, I looked about 12. All the people would ask me in my village. They say, "Does your mother know you're here?" Like, yeah, it's all good. I'm a grown up. But because I've always looked so young, I basically looked like a prepubescent boy my whole life.
ah,
I always looked very gender, and I'm a very small statured person. I'm a very tiny person,
uh-huh.
so I looked like a boy my whole life, and and it was part of that which made me realize, like how do I make congruent how the world sees me, and how I see myself, and how to continue on in my life. And so, by age 40, um, I realized, like, all right, this is something I have to attend to and think about.
Did philosophy help? Did friends help?
Well, you know what? You know how philosophy helped is just to have time to think, you know, just to have time to think. And a lot of people, are online and stuff like that. And this was, kind of before that. I mean, there was the internet then, but I didn't do much with it. But, I read a lot. Um, and one thing, that I think there's a comfort in what philosophy teaches. I find a comfort in this, for my personal life, is that, let's say there's a big question. There's a comfort to me. I'm saying, like, okay, maybe I won't get to the right answer, but like, we know how to do this. Okay, let's be quiet. Let's read some things. Let's think about some things. Let's talk to some folks. Let's think about it, right? And then to have and make space for that, that to me is comforting. That there aren't questions that are impossible to even come to any kind of, even preliminary answer. I'll give a story. When I was teaching math, it was just horrible. I was a bunch of our students had to take a makeup test in college algebra because they had all done so bad. So it was on a Saturday morning, horrible. So I was proctoring it for me and all my colleagues. bunch of students taking a college algebra course, and they kept coming up to me and saying, Loren, this isn't working out. I was like, you don't give hints. So I said, well, keep working on it. It'll be okay. Kept telling them this. Well, it turned out there was a typo in the problem. Horrible, like all of the strife and stress and like consternation my students had gone through, because it was a literally impossible problem. There was a plus somewhere where there was supposed to be a minus. So going back to philosophy, I'm comforted because there's these questions are really hard. What to do, how to make choices, how to go forward in your life. They're really hard, but they're not impossible. Like that type of.
Exactly. It's like the process of asking yourself questions that it's already soothing because it breaches a dialogue with yourself. Because you are not ignoring yourself, but you're talking to it, which is already important.
Right.
Okay. Remember any of the readings you made during that time that can be helpful for those?
But I went on a tour of trans autobiographies. There's kind of an interesting tradition for trans folks to make the right autobiographies. So Jameson Green's autobiography, Jenny Finney Boylan's autobiographies, Max Valerio's autobiography. A lot of these people I kind of know, or at least a little bit, if it makes sense. So it was a tour of autobiographies more than anything else.
That's great. That's a great. Can we say that The Quiet Place consists exactly in this serenity you have, that you are there for yourself, that no matter how crazy things are around, you'll make space to create a dialogue with yourself after all. Could it be?
I think so. I would, to make space for a dialogue with myself. I think sometimes it's harder now because there's so many more distractions now with the bing, 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 and you got to message somebody on Facebook, like whatever, But I think it's the dialogue with oneself, and then also to know that none of us are alone. I think about like, what does it mean to go to college or read a book? Is that, for me, it's like finding a friend. When I read Bell Hooks the first time, when she wrote about the importance of theory, I thought, oh gosh, I have like a lifelong friend now. And whenever I want to talk to her again about this, I get this essay and I get to read it. And then it's all right here with me again,
Yeah, she gets me.
Yeah. She's just so right. Just some thinkers are just like, right. You're just right. So there's nothing to say about it. And so I think it's like having time to have dialogue with oneself and knowing that there's this whole bunch of folks that are not only pulling for oneself in a kind of hopefully productive introspection, but are also teachers and friends. That makes it not a lonely exercise, I think.
Yeah. And as you were describing, we have in life moments in which we feel this call for congruency.
Yeah.
And I mean, it might happen if you feel the need for a transition, but sometimes it's just a spiritual growth or finding the job. And you need friends.
Yes. Yeah.
You need this dialogue to be there. You need to look for someone maybe who got this thought, this idea, and can get it closer to you.
I think so many of us are philosophers. I think everybody is a philosopher in a way. And I grew up thinking, like, I was the only one who thought about these weird things. Like nobody else is thinking about this, Loren. Like you're just being weird. And then when I realized, again, I was like, my late 30s when I went to PhD school, that like, oh, I'm not the only one thinking about this weird stuff. And some of these people have said some things that are really pretty fascinating. That was totally.
And what's your research focusing on? What have been the main hindrances to your research so far?
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll say two things. One is maybe a silly answer. I mean, one is deciding what to think about. There's so many things right now to think about in terms of like social and political philosophy or ethics or environmental ethics. So I think that's a personal problem, but to really delve into in a more formal way. But I mean, to be honest, it's all, so I've been a lecturer for 16, 17 years at my university, and it's very difficult having a 5-class load and do any research at all, basically. And that's a hindrance. And so then, one has to figure out,
Yes.
is this a hobby? Is philosophy? No, like it's more than a hobby. But there are limits to just what one can do in a day. And the book that was just published and other things, they're on controversial topics. I've already gotten hate mail about it, basically. And it's difficult to engage in some of these topics without the kind of support that comes with a permanent job. So I've had a temporary job for all these years, and I think, and I know a lot of people don't think a lot about the two-tiered system or even know it exists, but I think it's unjust, and I don't think it works well for our students or for our faculty members. So that's a hindrance.
I agree. And there's such a disparity between how certain jobs are paid. Yeah, it drives me crazy.
I'd be happy with a permanent job and that security. If I have a living wage, I'm glad, I'm happy, but it's difficult not knowing from year to year.
Well, in San Francisco, there was the crisis of teachers sleeping in a tent, but not only in San Francisco, in Europe too, London, England especially.
I saw that.
They couldn't afford a room, not even a room. They would go teaching, trying to convey values to their students. So this is absolutely.
I'm fortunate in that I'm a temporary employee, but I've been here a while, so obviously it doesn't seem very temporary. But it's a hindrance both like psychologically for me, and had financial challenges when I grew up, and so security is really, really important. But I try to work with it.
Are you thinking to tackle that with your research, or is it something that remains part of your life and not part of your studying?
That goes back to the first problem of deciding what to engage in. That goes back to problem number one. But I do think a lot about it, and I'm really active in the faculty union, and I do. But recently, like partly I wrote my book because the amount of anti-trans backlash, particularly with regard to legislative proposals, it was just immense. It was just, I just felt like there needs to be a response. There needs to be some sort of response to what's happening here. And so I felt like that choice was kind of made for me, maybe this is back to responsibility in a way, but I felt like, well, as a trans academician who is at least paying some attention to this and thinking about this, maybe I have a responsibility to maybe not have the last word, but contribute to the conversation.
What was the event that brought you to say, okay, I have to write something, I have to do something? Was there one event or something that's struck your attention the most?
Well, it was, you know, in 2015 was the same, you know, the same-sex ruling from the Supreme Court. You know, there was same-sex marriage, 2015,
Mhm.
and it was after, I guess that would be 2016 is when the very first Trans Lives in Theory course was a fully funded 3-credit course at my university that I was
Oh,
developed and taught. So before that, I had taught a volunteer 1-credit course. So I just did one credit overload, right? And I did this. But it was the first time we had actually a 3-credit course. Like, all right, we are like legit, you know, let's like bring it. And I started keeping track, just like, you know, like on the course page, I was keeping track of like current events, you know. And that was when the North Carolina uh, trans bathroom bill occurred. So it's like, oh, weird, look what's happening in North Carolina. And that was a rule that would have me and others like me, like in terms of my assignment at birth, have to use the women's restroom. That would not go well. And then there was like a whole bunch of states right after that had similar proposals. And then there was laws against adoption. Then there was laws against changing a birth certificate. And recently there have been laws about changing your name. And then there's laws about
mhm.
trans people flourishing in society, participating in society as equal members. And it was just like it was the quantity. I think it was the quantity. You know, there was this elation of the same-sex ruling, the elation that my class was funded. Thank you for the, you know, proponents at my university. And then it was like, what is going on? Like looking at a national level. And then I was, you know, a lot of academicians are a little obsessive. Then I just kept keeping track of like the amount of legislation. And I felt like, what's happening? Gotta, gotta make sense of this, or at least try. Um, so I think that was the
Do you think that your book managed to challenge the status quo? Managed to?
I do. I do because it's not it's not all right to demonize trans folks
Not really.
in order to like get a vote. I see trans folks and this affects gender non-conforming folks and gender non-binary folks, of course, as well. Um, you know, whether people identify as trans or not, that like we're being used as a kind of a pawn in a political game, you know, to instill fear in people in order to get the vote out, to get a certain kind of vote out, to get a certain person into office. And I think that there is at least one aspect of kind of trying to tie into the concern that people had that were disappointed by the Obergefell, the same-sex ruling, you know, that said that same-sex marriage was lawful, that there were people who were upset about that, and then kind of redirect that energy, you know, take all those email lists and just slightly change them to something related. um, you know, that now we have like 500-600 proposed legislation against trans folks since that time, and not all of it is passed. I mean, that I think is important to recognize. But what it's doing, it's making a social and political climate, which makes it very hard to flourish. And our students know. I mean, adult transgender non-binary people know this, and our students know this too. Um, you know, that what does it mean to like live in a country where, you know, the majority of states have at least some anti-trans legislation attempting to curtail one's social participation? So it is. I mean, certainly, I think, you know, I'm not sure. I think the status quo, you know, would be like, oh, this is a, you know, all the stereotypes about trans folks. And, you know, to be a proponent of those and to say like, this isn't a big deal. No, this is like really a big deal and it's wrong. And I think that needs to be stated unequivocally, and to recognize who's being used and the harm that it's causing to individuals and also our community.
What's the advice you would give to younger generations are in the same position, who are, trying to become themselves and have troubles flourishing?
Yeah. I mean, I think, related to kind of what we were saying before, I mean, take time to listen to yourself.
And
there's so much chatter and so much distraction.
Exactly. Because I have some students who say, but doesn't say anything. I mean, I stay there, and either it says too many things that are opposite to each other, and it becomes a kind of a background noise that disorient me, or it stays there and doesn't say anything. What advice can we give them?
I know. I mean, in that sense, I think then it's like not everybody likes this, particularly folks who like background, like people like background noise. I don't like background noise. I like silence. But like instead, it's like, but that. So I'm a very active person, So then I say, like, instead of like sitting in the room and thinking, walk, go for a walk and look at the beautiful colors. I'm totally taken aback by the colors of our world, right? Go outside, look at pretty colors. And then in the back of your mind, think about some of these other issues. And then they come together. Sometimes people say this is a great essay on happiness. And I've been trying to find it for years because I lost it, but it says that you can't shoot for happiness directly. You have to kind of sneak up on it and go around it. Like, I want to be happy, so do X. Well, I don't like to do X. Well, find what you like to do, and then that happiness is a consequence. And so, see the beauty in the world, and I think that allows one to maybe listen to oneself, and then know that there's a lot of friends out there. Some of them are on the internet. Some of them have written books. But don't be afraid to ask those questions, and also there's time in life. I mean, if decisions, I'm a horrible decision. I'm terribly indecisive because I want the right answer. And a friend told me once, said, like, Loren, if you can't figure out the right answer, maybe you just don't have enough information.
That's a great advice to give. That's right? So true.
Instead of saying, no, I have to do this. Well, maybe the answer is to like live with oneself for 6 months, a year, or for me, 40. The answers will come to the top. They'll come to the top. But if it's forcing, maybe it needs more time, more information, and that's all right.
I'd like to ask you this final question that I ask all my guests, which is, what do you think is the meaning of life? And if happiness has anything to do with that, or as you were saying, is one of the consequences while you enjoy doing what you like doing.
Well, ending on an easy question, I see.
I know, it's always like that. The best for the last.
Yeah. I mean, I think the meaning of life is to find and recognize meaning. I think it's just everywhere. I mean, those. And I know folks can get angsty and whatever, like, oh, life has no meaning, Everywhere I look, if I want to take a walk, I'd take my dogs for a walk in the morning. Like, I walk my dogs and I see beautiful colors of vegetation. I see other animals. I see people living their lives and in community with their friends and their family. And the love and affection that's there, that is so meaningful to me. And I think there's so much beauty. And I think that, to find a way to recognize, and I say recognize in the sense of I'm maybe not making meaning all by myself. It's in concert with recognizing the meaning that's there, which I really kind of think is everywhere. And I think that brings what I would call happiness or happiness for me. I mean, I know sometimes philosophers, when we said about like having time to think for oneself, there is, you know, some navel gazers, they say, like navel gazers, you know, gazing at my navel. I sometimes am happiest when I look out, you know, when I look out at all the meaning that's everywhere. And then I feel so fortunate that I get to participate in that meaning, you know, whether it's teaching my students, having conversations with my students, or having a conversation with a neighbor, or going on a backpacking trip, you know, to say like, wow, there's like this interconnected web of meaning, and I get to play a little part in that. And that makes me very happy. That to me, it kind of goes from morality and meaning to aesthetics, that I just find it just beautiful to me.
Yeah. Did it ever happen to you that you, I don't know, in any point in your life, you felt so sorry for yourself and meanings disappeared? And the more you felt sorry, the more meaning disappeared. And you got into this vicious cycle.
Yeah.
And then by luck or help from somebody else, you looked around, you looked somewhere else, and the meaning came back. Or helping someone else, or just enjoying the beauty of outside.
Yeah, I think beauty is the gateway. When I recognize beauty in all its forms, which are like, you know, infinite almost, beauty is the gateway to meaning, you know, and then like that kind of spiraling down, you know, where there's no meaning, or, you know, I'm in a vacuous void of nastiness, that starts to go away, because like, wow, I saw something really beautiful, and there's something else, and then the meaning kind of, for me, kind of flows after that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, Dostoevsky was right after all.
Yes.
Thank you so much for this beautiful interview, Loren. It's
been so much fun.
Yeah, it was very generous. That's what I think, with personal insights and philosophical reflections about your life.
Thank you. Yeah, I tried to make connections, and I think those connections are pretty easy to make most times.
Thank you for being my guest today.
Well, thank you for visiting with me. This has been great.